Hey friends, I hope you're doing super awesome. Welcome to the Julie's Paint Party YouTube channel where you can learn how to paint without breaking the bank. We just use simple supplies from the dollar store to learn how to become better painters, great painters, professional painters. I've been painting for over 30 years and I'm happy to use simple supplies that you can just go to your local dollar shop and grab off the shelf, bring them home, and get your party started. So, thanks for showing up with me today. I'm feeling really cozy. I have my coffee, and I'm wearing my cozy vintage Noel sweater with all these cutesy little mice. I'm just feeling it. I'm feeling that vibe. And I hope you are too. So I decided to do a classic painting today. I've had much success painting this with many people in person, and I thought I would just share it with you and the world, because that's what YouTube is, I guess. I'm just learning. And I really hope that you have fun painting it with me. So anyways, I have just a few simple supplies, and honestly, friend, if you end up really enjoying this process, look at, I'm all painted up already. If you see, you're like, what did you do, Julie? How did you get all this blood on your... No, it's just red paint. That's how I live. I just got paint all over me all the time. I can't help it. So if you enjoy this process, if you found that my teaching really works for you and you want to become a better painter, I highly suggest you go over to my website, juliespaintparty.com. You go /JPPVM for Julie's Paint Party virtual membership, and you will find over 250 more tutorials at your fingertips, ready to watch at any time. And I promise you, the more you do it, the better you get. So please entertain the idea. And for now, let's go through the supply list. Okie dokie smoky, so I'm using this really fun 10 by 20 canvas. I love these canvases because for all of my seasonal paintings, I can switch them out and they fit in all sorts of tiny little crevices in my house. I love the size of them. So 10 by 20, and honestly, whatever size canvas or watercolor paper or whatever you're using is fine. You don't have to have the exact same canvas to pull off this painting. Our simple supplies today are some red, white, black and brown, and I have my regular trifecta of brushes, which is my 3/4 inch Fatty McFadderson flathead brush, my 1/2 inch flathead brush, and my nice long liner brush that I love to use for everything. You know, if you have some favorite brushes, please feel free to use them. You don't have to do exactly as I'm doing. I love you to just, you know, I'm here to guide you, but this is your world. So feel free to use all the supplies that you have, the different colors you have. You can change the color of the hat, the mittens, anything you want. It's just fun to do it together. Okay, so grab up those supplies and let's get this party started. That's a dance party, by the way. I'll see you in a minute. So I'm going to switch up the way I do this a little bit today. In the past, I have drawn on my gnome to start, but today we're going to get a little crazy and we're just going to wing it. We're going to paint it fresh, out of the ether, straight from our brains. And as I'm chatting, I'm going to throw all the colors on my palette. Just remember, we're painting from home, so you can always add more paint to your plate. You don't have to waste it all right now. If you need to add more, you can always add more. So I have my red, my white, my brown, and my black. And the first thing we're going to do is we are going to paint this nice wooden style background, and then we're going to paint our gnome on top. So check this out. Excuse me. Coffee burps. Okay. So I'll leave this guy right here. Now, I've been reusing a lot of my canvases, so you might see, I have like a little house tracer on there from a previous paint party. Just ignore that. I'm going to paint right over top of it. And I'm going to use my big fat Fatty McFadderson flathead brush to paint this whole jamboree on there. So water. So what we're going to do, we're going to grab water. We're going to grab a nice big scoop of brown, and we're just going to start to rifle it up and down on our canvas. Now, we want to be able to paint this gnome on top without having to wait 8 hours. So using water to kind of push our paint around is going to be really beneficial so that it dries up really quickly. So I'm rifling my arm up and down with this brown paint. I'm going to start to add some different colors in there. So I like to take little corners of white and swoosh them in. I like to take little corners of black and swoosh them in. So we're making a really nice streaky background. And when I say streaks, I mean streaks. So I do not want to see stripes in the background. I don't want to see black, white, brown, black, white, brown. I want to see lots of random action happening at any moment on this canvas. Now, the key is if we mix it too much, then it's all going to become one brand new color. So it's nice to have lots of variations of color without over mixing, okay? So as soon as like your colors start to look like, oh shoot, this looks like just some sort of weird gray brown color over the whole canvas, you might want to start throwing some different colors in there. So every once in a while I grab a little bit of water, I just add it to my paint first, and then I'm gonna keep rifling my arm up and down. Add little bits of black in there, keep it from looking too light. Now every once in a while I just do a once over. So I can like really feel this in my arm right now. I've been painting for a long time. It really like never gets easier. I guess because I'm horribly out of shape. That might be why, but you know, if you feel it in your arm a little bit, you're probably doing it right. You can always kind of feel it. So now if it's really hard for you to go up and down on such a tall canvas, you can absolutely turn it on its side and go back and forth instead. Okay, if this is way easier for you, which it actually is. This is actually way easier going back and forth like this. Just do that instead. We're here for a good time. We're not here to like hurt ourselves, right? So I started to see some stripes happening. I saw black, white, brown, black. So what I like to do when that happens, I'll just take like a corner of any random color, like black or white, and I'll just kind of pop it in there so that we're offsetting some of the colors in the background. Grab some water, move that paint around. So what I'm doing is I really want to avoid having any goobers in the background, which means any kind of spots where there's elevated paint. I want this to be a goober-free zone. So bringing my brush back and forth really just wipes out all of the goobers that happen. And even though I'm making these little brush strokes up here, you can see how you can see how it kind of muckies up the canvas. It leaves these weird little brush strokes. So that's okay if that happens, but what I want you to do is if you see that happening, we really want to go from one side of our canvas all the way to the other. So from the top to the bottom, nice big long strokes, okay? All the way up and all the way down. Don't get stingy. Don't get lazy, don't get stingy. We can use little strokes to kind of get in all those little canvas holes, but in the end, I really want you to get nice long, big long brush strokes. Yeah. All right. There we go. So now that my canvas is completely filled up, then I can just take a little step back and see if I want to add any more color. So I'm going to add a couple little swoops of white. And you can see in this painting here, I added a little bit of red too. Now that's completely optional, but if you want, just take little tiny corners of red. You can kind of swoosh those in there. Just be wary about, well, you don't have to be weary, but watch out. If you mix it with the white, it's going to look a little bit more pink. So I would keep the red more close to the black and the brown, just to make sure that it doesn't turn into like a pink color in the background. But any variation of those colors is awesome. I'm just going to take tiny little corners of paint and just kind of pull them in at random so it really looks like I have some wood grain in the background. All right, I think that's good. Now, because I want to paint my gnome right on top of this, I'm going to give my brush a rinse. So this is how I dry my paintings without using a hairdryer, okay? I'm just drying it up, and I make sure my brush is nice and dry. It's always going to be a little damp because I just put it in my water, and obviously I've dried it off as much as I can, but I like to use my paintbrush kind of like a sponge. So instead of blow drying it, just with my clean dry brush, I'm going to give my painting a once over. So I'm going to go up and down from the left to the right, wipe my brush, and then I'm going to do the same thing back and forth just like a few times, maybe 3 or 4 times. And what this is going to do, it's going to wipe out any goobers that are on my canvas. It's going to thin out my paint so that it's going to dry up really nice and quickly. And that's what's nice about using the water, is that it also helps keep the paint really thin so that it dries even faster as well. Now, if you're going to want to give this as a gift or anything like that, I highly suggest getting in there and painting the sides, top, and bottom of your painting. And better to do it now than later, just so that, because it's like we're already painting the background. So if you get any paint on the background, it's a lot easier to fix up now, just in case. So I'm just going to use the same color, just some brown. Obviously you can take some black or red or white and mix it in there too, but you know, brown is easy. Just getting all of those sides nice and finished, and then you can give it to your favorite people after. Your favorite gnome loving people, because man, there's a lot of people who love gnomes out there, myself included. I love a good gnome painting. Every season I make a new gnome painting because it's just like so fun. They're just really fun to paint. And the top and the bottom. Now, if you're on an easel, you might have to wait to do the bottom of your canvas, and that's okay. I guess a little patience really helps. Just a little patience. Yeah. And technically, you know, while you're looking at your painting, you should really be able to put it any way you want. Like, you should be able to do it up and down like this, or turn it around. So you choose what your favorite, like, way this looks is. And then as we're, you know, we can let this dry for a minute, but while you finish that up, just keep doing that, and we're going to come back and just put on a few finishing touches to really bring this home and make it look like barn board. All right, so we're going to take a little bit of color, and we're just going to put these lines in the background. So you can see we basically have the same background, but I just added a few extra lines to really bring it home that our gnome is kind of in front of a barn or in front of some sort of rustic wood structure. And we can do this 2 ways. So personally, I love to just continue to use my big brush. So this is your brush assessment right here. If you have a brush like with a nice flat head, if you smoosh the bristles together with your fingers and they're nice and tight at the top, if you look at it from the top, it's nice and thin up here. This is a perfect brush to, I'm going to make a little mixture. So I'm going to grab a little black and brown together so it just shows up on the canvas. So it's a little bit of a dark brown. And when I'm making this, I'm kind of like smooshing my brush back and forth as I'm grabbing my paint, so my bristles stay nice and put together. Look, see how they're still nice and flat at the top? And I can use that flat edge to just gently cruise up. And as I'm doing that, I'm just using that last little bristle on the back of my paintbrush. So my gnome's going in the middle. I don't have to put lines everywhere. I'm going to put a line here, and I'm going to put another line up. So you can do it that way. I'm going to do another one right here. And I'm just using the back of the bristle. So I'm pulling up, 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 up. And that's giving me these lines in the background. Same from side to side. You can just do like a pull every once in a while just to make it look like there's some boards. It's really loose, guys. You do not have to have any particular way. Whatever you're doing is fine. Now, same thing, just adding these little lines in the background. I'm just using the bottom of my bristle, and I'm just making some wiggle lines up to make it look like there's some knots and some grain in the wood. So if you have a hard time doing that with your big brush, please feel free to grab your long liner brush, add a little water, and grab some of that brownie black mixture. And when I use my liner brush, I'm always using lots of water, and I'm really filling up my brush. So I get it nice and full. I don't just use the little tip. I get it nice and full of liquidy paint. I always like to kind of squeegee the excess off, so I'll give it a little twist to make sure there's a nice point at the top. So my brush has lots of paint here. Let's not have a shadow. So lots of paint, nice little point at the top. And that's a perfect tool to just create little lines at random. And I don't want to put too many because I don't want to overtake my canvas. You can also use white too. So adding a few extra little white strokes in there. Honestly, it's just for fun, and it just adds a little extra texture into the background. All right. Now, if you really can't see your barn boards, you can totally grab a little white and cruise along that line too. But I'm going to leave that up to you and how it looks. Any variation of those colors is going to look awesome. So get that done, and then once our painting is completely dry, so you need to dry it up, I always have, I'm going to come in here for a second. I always have my handy dandy blow dryer, which helps dry everything really fast. Or just take a little snack break, and when your painting is done, come back and we're going to start to kind of map out where our gnomie's going to live. That was weird. Map out where our gnomie's going to live. Okay? All right. See you in a second. Fantastic work, friends. Okay, so we are going to paint this gnome on here. And whenever I'm painting something from scratch without pre-drawing it first, I love starting at the center and kind of working my way up from there. So, of course, the nose is a perfect place to start and kind of grow out our lines from there. I always put my black lines last. So it's just like, if I don't have to do something twice, I don't want to do it. And if I put my black lines on first, then I'm probably going to have to fix them up later, and I just prefer not to. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at the nose, we're going to make the mustache and the beard, okay? And then we can make our big old hat from there. Everybody's is going to end up looking a little differently, and it's perfect. You're perfect exactly how you are. There is no rules to this, okay? So let's get started on that. Now, you can't really tell with this light that I have on, but his noses are very light pink. But to start, we're actually just going to use white. We're going to start with a little round nose in the middle, and we're just going to make the proportions of our beard first before we go and add any extra details on there, okay? Now, I am going to use my small brush to start, my medium flathead brush here. And, you know, we want room for a really long hat. So if you were to put your finger right in the middle of the canvas, it's about, you know, in the middle, we still want to hop down. Let's say, so if I was in the middle here, I still want to go down 1, 2, about 3 or 4 inches before I add his nose on there. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. So his nose is going to live in this area right here. Now I'm going to grab a little, just a little water and some white with my brush. Let's do that again. 1, 2, 3. So it's going to live right here. I'm going to put my brush straight on the canvas, right in the middle, and I'm just going to make a circle with my brush. So I just put my brush down and I twist it, I push and I twist it in a circle. Okay. Now this nose is going to change, so don't get too sticklery about it. We're just mapping out where these things live. Okay, so I'm thinking it's going to be just a little bit bigger. A lot of gnomes have big noses, so it's okay however big you want to make it. So some sort of, there we go. Probably like a 1.5 inch, 2 inch nose for this guy. And because I'm doing this on my own without drawing it first, I know for sure my gnome is going to look different than this one. All right, so my expectations are very, very low right now. So you can see that like his mustache kind of cuts off the bottom of his nose. So we have this like top of his nose here and a little triangle bottom. So what I'm going to do to kind of distinguish that, I'm going to grab some white and I'm going to, this bottom corner of my brush is going to be right in the center bottom of his nose here. And I'm going to pull up and over one way and up and over the other way. Now, the rule of thumb is if you start small, you can always make it bigger. But if you make a big old mustache, that's how big it's going to be. So if you want to leave a little room on either side to start, that's a good practice so that just in case you need a little fix-up-ins, there's some room, there's some wiggle room on each side of your canvas to make sure that you have a little bit of space to extend the mustache if you need it, okay? Next, I'm going to go back to that little point there. They're almost like leaf-shaped, so I'm going to put my brush straight on the canvas, and I'm not going to do as big of a bump. So this is a pretty big bump here. I'm going to just kind of hover just under the nose, and I'm going to connect it over here. Something like that. And I'm going to color it in. Now, if it bothers you that the nose is the same color as the mustache, what we can do to alleviate that at this moment right now, we can just take a tiny bit of red on our brush and just mix it in with the nose around that mustache area so that we can tell like that what area is which. So like we know that the nose is in this top area and that the mustache is cutting it off, because sometimes our brain just like really likes to see that, you know, it likes to see the differentiation between the two spots there. It's actually just a good idea to color it in pink right now anyway. So just grab a tiny little bit of red with your brush, mix it in with the white that's already on there, and you got yourself a pink nose. So I see lots of varieties of noses, my friend. Some are really, really like more on the red side. Some are more on the light pink side. They're all great. You do not have to worry about that. If you want to, you know, you get to decide what color the nose is and what variation of color. Okay, so we have a nose, we have a mustache. So now we're gonna make a nice puffy beard, and we wanna leave some space at the bottom. Okay, so we want some space for a little snow and some nice big booties. So there's two ways we can do this. We can grab some, so I rinsed my brush, I got rid of the pink that was on my brush. And we can decide from here by putting 2 little bumps there, or you can go over to the side of your mustache. So we want it to extend on the other side of the beard. So I'm just going to hop in 1 inch and I'm just going to make some little bumps down to the bottom. Same rules apply. If you make it small, you can always make it bigger. If you make it big, it's just going to probably stay big, right? So from here, I can actually make my beard a little bigger because all of this is getting colored in white. So as soon as you're ready, you can start to color it in. You know what? I'm going to grab my big brush for this because it's a lot more space. So nice big brush. Start to color in this beard. And I'm really moving around my paint. So I took a nice big scoop, but I don't just leave it on there and take another scoop. I really want to push my paint around. I want to use it. I don't want it to just like dry up nice and thick on my canvas. We can always put another thin coat of paint over top if we need it, but it is really nice to move that paint around. If you need a little drop of water to help smooth your brush strokes, you should totally do that. Now, sometimes when we have, you know, just regular paint on our brush strokes on the outside edges look a little dry. So adding a little drop of water to your brush before grabbing your paint is really going to help fill in those little dry cracks in your canvas and smooth out your the sides of your brush strokes here. Okay, I think that's pretty good. It's a little lopsided. I'm just gonna kind of change the shape of the beard, and you can do that right now. You can totally continue to change little things about the beard, and when you feel like it's proportionate, like you got the right like evenness on either side, the right fluffiness, then you can just stop. But that's why we start small, because ends up that you have to, like, you know, fix up some stuff on the sides, then you have some room to grow. So now it's all filled in with white, I'm just gonna make sure my brush strokes are really nice. So I'm gonna get in there, I'm gonna move any goobers around. I like to live in a goober-free zone most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time. So any places where there's some paint that's like elevated, I like to pet it away. And I kind of grab it with my brush and pet it down and make sure all of my paint is nice and smooth on the canvas. There we go. Now you can see that my beard looks significantly more white than my mustache. So I'm going to get back up in my mustache and give it a little extra loving. I might even make my mustache a little bigger too. I'm just going to add a little extra white to my plate. And I'm going to grab some of that. I'm going to fix up this stash. I like my gnomies to have magnificent beards and mustaches. And honestly, if your brush strokes are really dry, it just means that you just need to add a little drop of water to your brush before you grab your paint. And that's going to allow you to make nice smooth brush strokes. So I'm going to extend his mustache a little bit. I want it to be a little bit longer. Shoop. And I'm using the side of my brush, so too much water. I'm using the side of my brush, so as I'm pulling out, I'm just using that last little corner of my brush to make this little point on the end. If you have any issues with that, you can totally go and grab your liner brush if it's not working out for you. If you're like, oh, I just can't get it to have a little point on it, just switch it up for a second, grab that liner and make that little point over on the other side. Perfect. Now this Gnomie is very simple. We don't barely put any like shading or anything in this thing. It's all pretty straightforward colors. So it's kind of what I love about it. We just leave it really, really simple. Now you get to decide what level of white you want his beard to be. If you're really a stickler and you don't want to see any kind of brush strokes or brown popping out the background, you might want to give his beard a little touch up a little later, okay? For now, I think it's great. And I'm just gonna leave it be. And I'm gonna start to develop his hat on top of his head. So what I want you to do is just take an extra second, make sure that you have the proportions that you like right now. So make sure you like the shape of his beard, that it's as big as you want it to be, and his mustache is nice and long and pointy. And then from there, we're gonna come back and add a little extra, add some love in. We're gonna give him a nice big hat at the top. Nice work, friend. So we are gonna start at the brim of his hat, and you can see the brim kind of hugs the inside of this little curve in his mustache here and comes up and just goes past his nose up at the top here. Now I used a little bit of burgundy in this area, and I just think it's nice to have a little bit of a different color of the hat in the brim area. So that's what I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna use my smaller flathead brush for this, okay? So I got my medium flathead brush here. I'm gonna use the space between my black and red to make a little bit of burgundy. I don't need a lot, just a little. And when you're making burgundy, it's all about taking a scoop of red, okay, and little bits of black at a time. So I'll take just a little corner of black and mix it in there and watch it change really, really quickly. So honestly, depending on how, you get to decide the level of burgundy that you like. You know, you might not even want to give him a red hat. You might want to give him a green or a blue hat, and that is whatever color that suits you is totally fine. So we don't need a whole lot of it. So I'm going to make this, I'm just going to grab a little water and kind of make this a little bit more liquidy so I can extend the life of my burgundy here. And I can just use that kind of watery, it's not, I mean, I don't want it to be overly watery, but it's going to help my brush, again, make way nicer brush strokes, okay? So starting on one side, you know, if you use the corner of his beard as a guideline, that's a great spot to start. So if you just pop up over his mustache and you're going to make a little line up, and we're going to pull over to the other side, right, just kind of skimming his nose, and pop over on the other side like that. Now, it feels like it's a little small to me, so I'm actually going to move over a little bit. So again, start small. You can always make it bigger. Go big. It's really hard to make it smaller. So I'm going to just very carefully color in this brim of his hat around his nose. The cool part about it is that it's darker than the nose. I keep covering up his nose. So we can just take our time. If we have to like cut off the top of his nose a little bit, it's okay. Just kind of want to make it nice and even at the top. And bring it over, and that should be good. All right. And I'm just going to leave that be. So that is the top of his hat. But I'm going to leave it be. All right. Now for the big part of his hat, I'm going to use my big brush because there's a lot of space that's getting used up here. And I'm just going to use straight red. So over on this side, I'm going to start on the left-hand side. It kind of goes straight up and curves over to the side over here. Again, this is your world. If you want his hat to flip over a little bit more or flip to the left hand or right hand side, however you want it to go, it's gonna be okay, however you see fit, I promise. So I'm gonna grab a little water and I'm gonna grab that red paint and get my brush nice and loaded up. And I'm always making sure my bristles on my brush are gonna work for me. So I'm pulling away from my paint. I'm flattening my brush to make sure this is all gonna work out in my favor, okay? And I'm obviously gonna hop in a little bit on my hat so that the brim of the hat goes out a little further than the actual big part of the toque. So I'm gonna hop in and I'm gonna start to cruise up. Now, hats have little wiggles in it, so you can kind of pop over and just give it a little wiggle. And then as I get to the top, I'm just gonna let that last little bristle of my brush just kind of fling up, and that's it. And then I'm gonna do the same on this side. I'm gonna let it be a little bit more floppy. I'm gonna give it a few extra little lumpies here. And then as I get to the top, I'm gonna flop it over and pop. And it's different than my original one, and that's okay. I like it different, okay? I'm gonna actually make it a little wider. And then once I have it down, mostly I'm just gonna paint it, the whole thing in red. So it looks like I used a different color red for this hat than I did this one, and that's fine too. So we just use what we have, okay? You might not even have red. To be honest, red can be a little bit hard to find this time of year if it's holiday time in your neck of the woods. Holiday red, it can be a hard color to find. And you know what's happening? Yeah, this hat is so out of proportion. I'm gonna have to grow the brim of this hat because I definitely need this to be wider at the bottom. Julie's gone overboard with her super wide hat. So once I get a good base of color on there, I'm just moving that paint around. Now, you might find that your red is a little bit less, a little bit more transparent, I should say. So you might find that you want to give your hat a second coat before putting the plaid on top. I'm okay with mine, so I'm just gonna leave it be. And while I let it dry, I'm gonna widen the rim on my hat here. I'm gonna use some more of this burgundy. And I'm gonna bring my hat over a little bit more. There we go. Make it a little bit more proportionate, right? So that's what my Gnome looks like right now. And as I let that dry, we have to let it dry before we put our plaid on top. So it depends on where you're at, but while that's drying, it's a really good opportunity to put this guy's little mittens on, and then maybe even add his shoes on next, okay? So why don't we just take an extra second, make sure you love the proportions of your gnome, and then we're gonna come back and add some little mittens to this guy's hands. Now I'm gonna grab my medium flathead brush, and for his hands, I just wanna make sure I have enough space in the middle, so I'm not gonna make them super big. I want him to hold his little sign here, right? So I'm gonna grab some red, and that same old saying, if you start small, you can always make it bigger. So starting out, really just one of these little inverted corners here, I'd put my brush straight on the canvas, and I'm gonna make just like a round circle. So, you know, there's obviously more than enough room in there right now. So I can make that just a little bit bigger. I'm just going to bring it down a little bit more. And then I'm going to give him this little thumb here. So the thumb just comes out the side. I'm going to pop up and I'm going to put a little nub in right next to the circle here. And that is that. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to start at this little corner here. I'm going to make, you know, a decent sized circle, probably a couple inch circle. I'm just smoothing out my edges, making sure it's all nice and put together. And then when I'm ready, I'm going to put a little thumb nubbin on there. Now, if you want, you can extend the mittens on the outside of the beard just to show that they're kind of like his arms are a little bit hidden behind. Or you can just leave them be. I will let you decide. Okay? Oh, so funny. Now, the easiest way to kind of get our board behind there, so you can see the mittens are actually covering up most of the side of the board, and then they come together on the top. So I'm going to grab some of my brown. I'm going to mix, yeah, you know, it's nice to have a little mixture of that blackish brown. So I'm going to mix a little brown and black together using my medium flathead brush. And what I'm doing, I'm smoothing out my bristles. And, you know, I want it to be on just, if you kind of pop up from that little crevice in the thumb and pop up a little bit, I'm going to use my brush just as like a stamp. I'm going to stamp a line there. I'm going to go down. I'm going to stamp a line here. Same over here. Stamp here and here. And that way there, I have just enough on the top of each side to bring my board over and have a little square in behind his hands there. Okay, so I'm going to get in there and I'm going to paint around my mittens, and I'm going to paint from side to side. So I'll start at the board and pull away. And then I put my brush on the mitten and I pull away. So even if my brush is on like a little angle here, I'm still pulling straight across. On and away. You can get in that, you can just use the little corner of your brush to get in that little crevice there. And pull away, pull away. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm on my canvas, I'm right at the edge, and I'm pulling into my board. If we start at the object, it's a much lower risk of getting the paint inside the glove. If we pull away from the glove, as opposed to towards the glove, that way there. And then I'm just going to smooth it out. So I have this nice little mixture of black and brown in my sign. I can absolutely grab a little bit of white too, just to kind of swoop a couple little board lines in there. But it doesn't have to be complicated. You can even throw some red in there if you want to match the background. And that should do the trick. Now from this point, if you feel like the sign needs to be a little bit bigger in his hand area, you can always extend it on either side. Like you can bring this a little closer into the mittens or whatever, just to make it look like he's really holding it. But that is how we do it. This is how we do it. So we're still waiting for our hat to be dry up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my medium brush again, and I'm going to build this guy some boots. So his boots actually connect in the middle. So I'm just going to kind of pop out one boot from the side here, and then one boot from the side here and connect them and color the whole thing in black. So I'm going to grab my brush, little dab of water before I grab my paint, and smoosh those bristles together, really pet out, make sure they're going to work for me. And his boots can be any shape. They could just be round, they could be, you know, have a little toe on them. Now I'm going to pop up into his boot. I'm going to go to this second little poof here, just in the middle, and I'm going to pull up and down. Do the same thing over here. My brush is on its side. I'm going to pull up and down. Okay? And that way there, I can just connect it with a line down the center, and I can color it in all black. Try and get as close as possible under the beard. As you're coloring it in, the boots might take different shapes. I just try my best to try and keep it even on both sides as much as possible. So if, we don't usually get pairs of shoes that are like super ultra different from each other. So I try and keep them looking relatively the same on each side. It's never perfect, but we do our best. Just going to give this a little look there. Make sure that it's nice and straight. Nonetheless, we're going to put some snow over top the bottom of his boots anyway, so if it's not straight down at the bottom, it's gonna be okay. And I'm just gonna round it out a little bit more on the ends. There we go. So I have a little bit more space on this side than I do this side, but it is what it is. That's fine. That's okay by me. Now, I have this black on my brush, and really, whenever I have a color on a brush, if I can, I kind of start to pop around and figure out where I can use it. So at this point here, we have most of the elements that we need on our canvas, and we can really start to outline our gnome. Now, depending on the brushes that you're using, I feel like just using my flathead brush here is going to do the best job. So I grab a little water, I just load it up, make sure my bristles are all nice and put together, and just very, steadily, I just start to outline all the places in my gnome. Now, if you feel like this brush is not going to work for you, that's okay. You can grab your long liner brush. And the best way to use this, I grab some water. I've mentioned this before, grab some water, and I really make sure that my brush is really nice and filled up. So I'm adding little bits of water. You have to have water in the paint for this to work really, really well, because you don't want to make 100 little mini strokes. You want to be able to kind of find your flow with your brush. So really loading it up with paint and giving it a twist so it squeegees off the excess water and paint from your brush. But I really have it nice and filled up. My brush is really, really full of paint, and it's nice and liquidy. I'm not just dipping in the top. I got the whole thing full, okay? And that allows me to get in there and really make lots of lines without having to reload every single time. So I did the whole half of his beard without having to go back and get some paint. Same here. So, sometimes if you're feeling a little insecure, I often use my pinky finger as like an anchor to my hand, or if your paint is dry in the background, you can use your full hand to secure it. I find if I'm out here, it's a lot harder to kind of reach those lines. So I'll put my pinky finger down And that gives me enough of an anchor to kind of get in there and feel secure about doing my outlines. All right. And I don't know if you just noticed what happened there. So, you know, paintbrushes work a little differently than markers or pens, where normally you would just trace it around and do your thing, but sometimes paintbrushes have an endpoint. So if I start at this crevice and, you know, work my way around, I get as far as I can go, but then I stop. And then I'll go to the other side and kind of meet it over on the from the other side, just to make sure that, you know, my paintbrush doesn't really get away from me, because that can totally happen. Paintbrushes can get a little like flaily and they want to fling in the wrong direction or do all sorts of random stuff without, you know, your consent. So just know that it doesn't always happen in one round go. Sometimes you have to start one way and then meet it in the middle the other way. And you know what? I'm really loving how this paintbrush is feeling right now, so I'm going to continue just using this guy to outline everything. And I'm telling you, and I'm going to repeat myself a lot on this, because you see, I did this whole side of my mustache without having to reload my paint. If you're finding you have to reload every couple inches, it means that you should really be adding a little bit more water to your paint. Not so watery that it's not going to show up on the canvas, but liquidy enough that like it's going to allow you to make nice long brush strokes, because it makes life so much easier, especially when we're outlining. I know that I didn't have enough here because I got, like, it started drying up. And as soon as my brush starts to dry up, that's when things don't look as nice as I want them to. So every once in a while, I'll just grab a little more water and I'm just adding it to the side of my black here and reloading, making sure that it's mixed in with my paint. Go back to my canvas and get those lines on there. I find tracing to be super relaxing. Some people really don't, so you might find this very stressful. And really all it takes is just a little bit of practice. If you need to turn your canvas around to make your hand go in the right direction that you prefer, you can totally do that. You're not stuck in one position this whole time. But there's little folds in his hat, so I'm just kind of pulling in and letting these little folds happen here. And whenever I'm pulling up into a point, whenever I want there to be a point somewhere, I never start at the point. I always pull up to the point, because as I'm pulling up and towards that point, I can kind of swing and get it up and off the canvas, because if I start at the top, it's gonna look like it has like a big like blob at the top. That's not necessarily true at all times, but more than likely it's going to be thicker at the top than having a point on the end. So even for the mustaches, I'm pulling towards the tip of the mustache and away. I don't want to start at the tip and move in. It's two totally different vibes. Now I'm going to just trace my sign out here. And there we go. So we have most of the tracing done. And next we got to work on that plaid design. So what I want you to do is I just want you to get everything all nice and traced, and let's wait for those outlines to dry before we hop into our hat, just to make sure we're not going to hit any wet paint anywhere and smudge up our painting, okay? So I'll see you in a few. Way to get through it. Anyways, so you can see I have all my black outlines on except for this plaid pattern. And the plaid can be a little bit tricky. We just got to take our time with it. So let's take a look at our gnome, the original gnome to start. And what we're going to do is we're going to grid off his hat to make it into this plaid pattern. So the first thing I do is I start by putting all of my horizontal lines in first, okay? And you can see they can really go in any direction. So some are straight, some kind of curve down, some kind of curve up. You know, it depends on where your folds are, or it doesn't really even matter at all. As they start to get to this top part, they start to kind of angle upwards into this little part of the hat up here, okay? So honestly, it's all gonna work out fine. We just have to be extra mindful when it's time to actually color in the buffalo plaid. The trickiest part about it is that our brains think that we need to make checkers. So if that was true, all of these red spaces here would all have black in them, and it would be like a checkerboard, right? But the tricky thing is that every other line has a red square that's opposite of these black squares here. So this is a precursor. I'm obviously going to go through it first, right? So let's get the party started on this Buffalo Gnome here. And everybody's hats are going to be a little bit different, so we just kind of got to work with the shape of the hat that we have already. Now, I'm still going to continue to use my long liner brush, and same rules apply. Water. I'm going to add it to the side of my black paint here. So I'm going to grab a few drops of water, like 3 or 4, and really mix it into the side of my black so that it gets nice and loose. And I'm loading up my brush so that it has lots of paint in it. And then I squeegee. You can, do it on the side of your plate if you want, or just right on your plate. Either twist on the side or kind of tap your brush just so it squeegees off some of the excess water. Make sure your brush has a nice point on it and it's nice and full of black paint. And like I said, we're going to start at the bottom and we're going to work our way up and make these lines. So I'm just going to, about an inchish. I mean, you can make them however big you want. And I'm just going to start by following the brim of the hat. So I'm just following the parallel to the hat to start. And depending on the shape of the hat, so if your hat starts to bend over a little bit, so I'm going to start over here and I'm just going to start to you can kind of taper it on the one side, or you can make it bigger. So if I want to taper it here, I'm just going to bring it up and over. And honestly, there's no right or wrong way to do this. It's a gnome. He probably sewed it himself. It's fine. It's fine, I promise. We have to lower our expectations of what we think perfection is. So mine's going to be a little all over the place. And like I said, as I start to reach this top nubbin here, I'm going to start to angle. Ooh, that was a big one. But I'm going to start to angle my brush strokes up. So these are obviously way bigger than the rest. And then finish off on its side up at the top here. Okay? I mean, it's going to be adorable in the end, no matter what direction our lines are going in. Now we got to cruise up and over to the top part of our hat here. So I'm going to go straight up, and then as soon as I start to hit this area, I'm going to turn in and hit this little point at the end here. So again, about an inch in, inch and a half, I'm going to cruise up. And if you have to follow the shape of your hat, you can. And then I'm going to start to turn in and taper, and this is going to hit this last little peak there. So all of these lines are going to kind of taper off into the top part of the toque. And mine is going to end up being a little different than the last one, obviously, because my hat's a little wonkier, or I don't know, maybe it's a little bit more put together, I'm not sure. Now, notice, right, like I'm making these nice long lines, and the only reason why it's working out for me is because I have that liquidy black on my paintbrush, and because my paintbrush is completely filled in. If you're only making it up like a little ways into these lines, it's simply because you do not have enough paint on your brush, or you need a little bit more water in your paint so that it's not drying up as you're kind of moving up your hat here. So now I'm gonna start back at the top, and I'm gonna use this line here to kind of bring my line back down the other way, because I just want to make sure that I'm hitting that line. There we go. Okay, the grid is made. Now, first things first, I'm going to get all of these black squares out of the way. So starting on the bottom rung, I'm going to just mark off where all of these squares are. So I highly suggest doing this first, because if we only do one at a time, our brain takes over and thinks we're doing the right thing, but it's always the wrong thing. I can't tell you how many times I've messed up a buffalo plaid pattern because my brain decided it just wanted to drift off and think about other things while I was doing it. So let's stay hyper aware while we decide where our black squares are going to be, okay? So I'm just going to grab my brush, starting in this bottom corner. I'm going to mark them off. Hop over one, so we skip one, and then we skip one again, and we do it here. Now, we skip all the way over this line, and we go back up, and we're just following that same pattern. Skip a line. So you can do this in different ways. You can keep going that way, or as we're moving up, you skip a square and pop one in. Skip a square all the way up. Now that we have our pattern emerging, we can just skip that square and make sure we're hitting our target zones here. Oh, see, I almost put one there. That's what happens. You stop thinking about it for a second, hop a square, and that should be good. Okay, so once those are all filled in, then we can get in there and fill in these black squares first. The cool thing about having flat edge brushes is that we really just, you know, the edge is already flat. We have to put it on that line and just pull and fill it in a grid-like pattern. It's a little bit more complicated on the side here, but not much. You're good to go. Fill it in, fill it in. I am loving how my Gnome is looking right now. I truly hope that you're feeling the same way. And this is only one of many, many tutorials. So I have done this painting before as a video tutorial that wasn't on my YouTube channel, as a personal video. And we actually draw the gnome on first before we paint it. And that happens sometimes, not all paintings. So some of the paintings we do, we start like this one. We just do it fresh from the get-go. And, you know, start with the background and work our way forward. There's other paintings where it's really important that we know our proportions first. And these are all things that we learn with practice. So if you're like loving how this is, and if you want to have more choices to what paintings you want to do and practice, or paintings that you want to like learn how to paint different flowers, or different gnomes, or like a reindeer. Oh man, there's so many, hot air balloon, lots of different things. The my Julie's Paint Party virtual membership hub is full of these seasonal paintings. And what I like about that is that you can end up going back and, you know, you take elements from different paintings and you can start to create your own paintings from this. You can, you know, you're like, oh, I really liked the tree, how she did how we did the tree in this painting. I'm going to use that tree with my gnome and try and like mix and match some of the things. You know, there's lots of options when it comes to that kind of stuff. Okay, so we have our black pattern. Now, what's going to happen now is that I'm going to make these little lines in each one of my squares, and whenever there's a black square line here, my lines in this square go diagonal towards the top left corner, and as we hop up, these lines go up towards the top right corner. So there's a couple different ways we can do this, all right? I'm gonna use my liner brush again, and it just takes a little bit of time and focus. And like I said, I'm gonna start by just adding diagonal lines all the way across. Now, if you're in the mode, you might want to just keep doing the diagonal thing in the same direction. So going, you know, hopping up each section and just keeping your lines going. Once you get a flow, you know, it's kind of nice to keep that flow going. Now, because I have that liquidy black on my brush, because it's nice and loose and liquidy, I can take my long liner brush and kind of flatten it out. But it's nice and full, like my brush is still nice and full of paint, so I can really knock off a lot of squares before I have to reload my brush. So once you get a flow going and you start adding these little lines in there, you don't have to like stop every few lines and reload, which is really nice. Because the paint on my brush is so nice and liquidy, it just keeps filtering down to the bottom of the tip of my hand brush. So I'm just using the tip of my brush, but because that liquidy black keeps kind of rolling down and into that top area of my brush, I can really just keep going and going and going. It's like Energizer Bunny styles, you know? Just keep going, just keep swimming. You can dory it, whatever you need to do. However you need to hold your canvas to make it work. And so if you totally hate making these lines, you can stop there, and instead of going the opposite way, you can actually just create a different color of red if you wanted to. So if you liked making the lines, keep going in the direction that you're going in, that's fine. But if you want to change it up a little bit, we can make that little bit of burgundy. So I'm going to grab some red and some of that black there. Create the burgundy color that we used for the brim. It doesn't have to even be the exact burgundy color, it can be a little different. And every other square under the black, we can get in there and just use a little bit of a darker color instead of using the lines. So it should really be burgundy red, burgundy red. You could do gray, okay? I wonder how the brown would look. See if the brown works. I mean, it's okay. Nah, I think I'd stick with the burgundy. I love just giving different options because it's nice to know that you don't have to like stick with the original plan all the time, you know? It's sometimes we get a hit, and I'm telling you right now, there's no better if you get an idea and you feel insecure about tackling the idea because you're not sure if it's going to work. There's a lot of times where it doesn't work, but honestly, it's so worth it because then you know, and then you've at least explored that part of your creativity without, you know, like, with being a little brave. And it's okay. Sometimes you can get 90% done a painting and make one wrong move and have to restart. And I can't tell you how many times I've had to do that. And it's okay. It's for sure super frustrating. Oh my goodness, is it ever frustrating? But it's not the end of the world, and at least we learn something from it. Especially if you're bound to being a good painter. All right, just a couple more squares. I think the only problem I have with coloring these squares in right now is that they, I might have to go in and fix up the black a little bit because I painted over some of the black in the lines. So I have to get in there and just kind of fix up my buffalo lines. And there we go. How fun is that? Yay! Now, obviously, you can choose any saying you want to add into your little sign. I love the saying joy to the world. I also love the saying peace on earth because I truly believe in peace and love. It is just how I was born and raised. So getting in there, and you don't have to have perfect writing. If you have a paint pen, that can be really cool. Peace on earth. And I love holding that prayer in my heart. And the best way we can do it is by spreading peace to each individual person as we meet them. So, peace on earth. Now, I have this little bit of white on my brush. So, I'm going to grab a little water and I'm going to do that same little mixture. A little water, I'm going to mix it in my white, get my brush nice and filled up and squeegeed off. And I'm going to pop around and add some white highlights in random places. So, I love adding a little highlight around the edge of his mittens, on the outside of his boots, and in between. Ooh, a little highlight on the top of his nose and the brim of his hat. Really makes that pop. And even a couple little highlights up the side of his hat. you know, it just makes it pop. It just gives a little pop, you know. I gave him a little black thing, but little black ball on the top of his stick. But I'm gonna get in there and I'm gonna give him a little fluffy white poof at the top of his hat today. Just gonna tap a bunch of little nuggets up there. Yeah, a little fluffy one. I can also give this guy a couple laces, so I'm just going to pull down a few little lines from his shoes, lace them up, and then I'm going to grab a bigger brush with no burgundy on it, and I'm going to make some snow at the bottom. Sorry, you can probably hear my phone ringing. It's like this nah. It's not you, it's me, I promise. And I'm just gonna kind of lay a whole bunch of white at the bottom down here. And I'm just gonna cover up the bottom of his shoes, kind of like he's hanging out in the snow. So I wanna see some nice elevated snow. This is when I like when there's goobers, when there's some elevated snow down here. So I just really like glop it on. And there we go. So that's the gnome. If you're feeling really, really wintry, you can totally turn around. I'm going to use my smaller paintbrush for this. But I love to add a little snow. So I'm going to grab the bottom, the end of my blah, blah, blah. What is this called? It is a paintbrush. And that is the end of the handle. And it's the wood part, not the tip, the wood part. Wow. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to pop some snow around. A little dip, like if you get a nice little dip of snow, you can usually do like 3 or 4 good little snow pops here and there. And when snow is falling, it's not exclusive to the outside of our gnome. So, you know, if a couple little snowflakes dance inside his hat, that's cool too. Another great way to make snow is to use an old toothbrush. You can kind of get some, if you really want to make it super snowy, but I think this one I like to leave just like a moderate amount of snow. It doesn't have to be like a whole schwack of snow. It's more of like a nice peaceful style snow so that everybody's gonna make it home and nobody's getting stuck and it's all good. And that about does it. So friends, look what you made. Yay, it's so good, so good. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I'm always so grateful to hang out, even if it's virtual. I know that this is getting through to you, so it really makes me super happy to be painting with you. I would love to see your results. So if you can you please take a picture, even if it's like, if it's just the picture of the painting, that's fine, but this is way better when you're like this. Hey, I made this, okay? Take a picture and go over to the Julie's Paint Party public Facebook group and post it so we can all see and tell you how awesome you are. And you should be really proud of what you made. So when you're done, grab your paintbrush, grab a little bit of paint, and make sure you put your signature on it. I'm going to put a little JR down here for Julie Robinson. And that is that. I hope you had so much fun. And don't forget to check out my membership, juliespaintparty.com/JPPVM. It's going to give you all the details you need to have access to way more paintings and choices, same style. And I will hopefully see you next week. So have a great day. Bye.